Good morning. I'm Emma and my husband Johnny and I joined the fantastic Ebby family on Easter Sunday 2018. I'll start by setting this morning's talk in its context with the previous Ebby series and with our current one. Back in the autumn term, in our series called The Jesus Way, we explored Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew chapter 5 to 7, and thought about its implications for and its impact on our lives lived today. 2 weeks ago, Helen introduced our current series, which is titled The Jesus Way, What Happens Next, and unpacked Jesus' miraculous healing in 3 very different contexts. Last week, Derek explored the cost of following Jesus and talked about how a believer's life can often be packed with challenge. And so we come to this morning, week 3 in this series entitled The Jesus Way, What Happens Next? Before I unpack things further, I want to mention this question here in our series title. For some, the question, what happens next, might imbibe you with feelings of excitement and joyful anticipation for the adventures waiting for you around the very next corner. For others, you might feel yourself filling up with anxiety, fear, or trepidation even, at the thought of what your near future holds. What I want to open by saying is that when we read the Bible, we have the benefit of hindsight. We see and we know how people's stories end. Whereas in our current lives now, no one here can answer definitively what happens next in our lived experience. None of us know how our next month's chapter is going to end, or the one after that, or the one after that one. What I hope that I can bring to you today is a sense of confidence that Jesus goes with you, shoulder to shoulder, into your tomorrow, accompanying you right by your side into whatever comes next for you, all of the way. And what I also hope to communicate this morning is that Jesus is for you, that Jesus is able in all circumstances, that Jesus is the safest pair of hands that you could ever wish for, and that he has totally got your back. For this, the third talk in the series, the title I've been given is Jesus and Authority. I wonder what your immediate reaction is to the word authority. I wonder if you shiver at the mere memory of a difficult former boss who maybe was dictatorial with a grandiose sense of entitlement, or whether you go further back to a teacher who just seemed to bark orders, gave you the sense that you didn't meet expectations and who didn't understand you at all, or whether you go still further back again. And sadly, it's a parent who comes to mind. A parent for whom it was their way or no way. A parent who was always determined to tell you how you should live your life, who you should be, and what route you should take, and that any deviation from their expected, hoped-for path for you was always inevitably going to be a disappointment to them. Maybe others of you have been majorly blessed by the significant authority figures in your life, those you felt comfortable with, those who've imbibed you with confidence, those who hold a mirror up to you and you like the person that you see reflected back because somehow they always manage to bring your best self to the foreground, and those in authority who have even maybe given you wings. I've got such a positive example from only last week to share with you. My husband and I, Johnny and I, love being invigilators throughout the year in a school in Weston. On Tuesday, we headed in to invigilate the actual GCSEs for our first day back since invigilating PP mocks before Christmas. Within 5 minutes of arriving on my way to the sports hall, the message came that the exam board inspector had just arrived to carry out an unannounced visit. These are really important moments, but without the equivalent Ofsted phone call first, when exam boards check whether you're compliant with reams and reams of regularly updated exam conditions and administration requirements, there can be major ramifications for the entire school with fails. But we weren't at all rattled, because we're blessed with an amazing exam officer. Her training of us has been absolutely superb. We know all of the protocols, back to front and around the corner. We've been prepared for all eventualities, and we're supremely confident that our exam officer so knows what she's doing. But more importantly, I think, than that, she knows so much more than just protocols and paperwork expectations. She knows us, her team, who she appreciates and respects. She knows the diverse ragtag mix of individuals, and she places us very strategically. She's fully aware of our weaknesses, like don't ever put me in charge of technology in the sports hall, with the 2 huge screens and the laptop with the audio announcement to be played before every exam and showing the exam clock, finish times, etc. No, not one for me. But she also knows really comprehensively everyone's strengths and those situations that bring out our greatest skills, those places where each of us has a chance to shine, to make a tangible difference to young people. She really is such a talented and effective manager. And Johnny and I drive all the way to Weston for our invigilation work because someone like her is in authority over us. I can tell you now that we wouldn't travel those sorts of different distances if that wasn't the case. How do we develop confidence in our authority figures? I think that it happens when you learn to trust them, when you give them opportunities to show that they're a safe pair of hands, but also that they're those who both know you and have got your best interests at heart. What happens when we trust Jesus and his authority? Let's read the first situation that I've been given and see how people then responded to the authority of Jesus. I'm reading Matthew 8, verses 23 to 27 in the NIV. Then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and waves obey him." The first thing I want to comment on is the opening of verse 24, without warning. How often have you found that the furious storms in your life have happened without warning, that you never saw them coming? How often have you been caught off guard by unexpected events that have knocked you off your feet? A bit like I said earlier about us not knowing that that's how a chapter in our life was going to end, so not how we thought that it would. I wonder how you react when you're faced with the unexpected. And I wonder what your confidence lies in moments like that. It was only a few weeks ago that I was stood right there, catching up on the details of a medical incident that I knew had happened at the end of March to Steve Hotchkiss from our home group. What he said to me about that moment had such an impact on me, stood talking with him over coffee after the service. He told me that when the numbness unexpectedly began travelling up his arm on a golf tournament in Saunton, away with his son and friends, that when his left leg began to suddenly weaken and he felt the side of his mouth becoming numb and he thought that he was having a stroke, what he did in that instant was he shouted out in a loud voice, "Jesus, please save me." And I think that Steve, in that moment of furious storm, believed that Jesus could save him. And I believe the same. You see, when you trust someone who you think has authority over life itself, and when you believe that they ultimately have your best interests at heart, it gives you a confidence that cannot be quantified. I'd like to think that if I was in the same position as Steve was that day, obviously it wouldn't be in the middle of a golf course playing a round of golf, that I would do the same. Call out to Jesus to save me and believe that he could. What do you think that you would do in that same situation? In this passage, I sense the disciples didn't think that Jesus saw the storm coming. And I think that sometimes we're in danger of thinking the same, of thinking that situations are outside of Jesus' control, that he has no command over them or any authority to speak into them. But that's not the case, in my mind anyway. And the disciples realised that that wasn't the case either. They were totally amazed when they said to each other, when all was completely calm, even the wind and the waves obey him. I can almost feel the sense of awe radiating off of them. I'll leave Steve to fill interested folk in on the remaining details of how Jesus intervened in his emergency situation and how that particular chapter ended for him. But I will say that when I messaged him for permission to share and to ask for further details, I imagined the same sense of awe radiating off of Steve when he turned to his doctor in the resulting aftermath after an operation to have a blockage removed from his neck and said to him loudly and confidently, "Jesus saved me." The second set of responses to Jesus' authority that I've been asked to speak about are found in Matthew 8, verses 28 to 34. I'll read them from the Message version of the Bible. They landed in the country of the Gadarenes and were met by two madmen, victims of demons coming out of the cemetery. The men had terrorised the region for so long that no one considered it safe to walk down that stretch of road anymore. Seeing Jesus, the madmen screamed out, "What business do you have giving us a hard time? You're the Son of God. You weren't supposed to show up here yet." Off in the distance, a herd of pigs was browsing and rooting. The evil spirits begged Jesus, "If you kick us out of these men, let us live in the pigs." Jesus said, "Go ahead, but get out of here." Crazed, the pigs stampeded over a cliff into the sea and drowned. Scared to death, the swineherds bolted. They told everyone back in town what had happened to the madmen and the pigs. Those who heard about it were angry about the drowned pigs. A mob formed and demanded that Jesus get out and not come back. In Helen Wong's excellent opening talk of this series, she said in relation to Jesus, he has complete and total authority over both the spiritual and physical realms. I think this is so evident when you see today's passages next to each other. And for me, it's the response of folk to that authority of Jesus that I find so striking here. A word that jumps out so strongly to me in the Message version is the word victims. To me, that's a really packed word. It suggests many moments of pain, many moments of being stigmatised and looked down on by others for these two men who had terrorised the region for such a long time. What Jesus wants to do, quite simply, is to set them free, because Jesus has the power to set people free, both then and now, I believe. It's the reaction to these men's freedom by the mob that quickly forms that I find so startling. They are so angry about the way that two men have been released from years of torment and bondage because of the way that they are inconvenienced by it, with the pigs stampeding over the cliff edge. An inconvenient gospel is one when the status quo is preferred by those around us, who are entrenched in their comfort zones and don't want them messed around with for anyone's benefit or greater good. There is a phrase to describe this. It's called, "I'm all right, Jack." Let me share the Wikipedia definition of it with you. "I'm all right, Jack" is a British expression used to describe people who act only in their best interests, even if providing assistance to others would take minimal or no effort on their part. The phrase is believed to have originated among Royal Navy sailors. When a ladder was slung over the side of a ship, the last sailor to climb on board would say, "I'm all right, Jack, pull up the ladder." The latter half of the phrase has been used to call out unfairness and hypocrisy of those who've been seen to have benefited from opportunities handed out to them, only to deny such opportunities to others. The type of mindset that we see in this Matthew passage also reminds me of an acronym that first appeared in the 1970s. It's the term NIMBY, which stands for Not in My Backyard. It's the attitude, I think, that says, oh, I want people to be helped as long as it's not going on next door to me. I want people to be supported as long as it's not happening over the road from my house. I want people to be assisted as long as it doesn't interfere with my journey to work. Don't get me wrong, I want people to be cared for as long as I'm not inconvenienced by the support you give to them. How do we stop ourselves from becoming one of them? Sometimes when we unnerve people, when we somehow undermine their loved comfort zones and familiar status quo, when we inconvenience them with our care for others, when we make them question their comfortable life, whatever that looks like, they choose to reject us. That doesn't mean that we should stop. It certainly didn't stop Jesus. He was going to deliver people and set them free, come what may. And as a result, a whole town demanded that he leave and not come back, because he chose to end the torment for two men, not in their right minds. Are we prepared to brave rejection to do the same? If we're totally honest with ourselves, would we have been more concerned about the delivered men or about the lost pigs if we lived in that particular town? I want to say before I share my final passage in Matthew that I arranged the date for my Ebby preach several months in advance, and as the weeks get closer to it, I wait with eager anticipation to find out what series my talk is part of and what my title, theme and verses are going to be. I was away from my Bible when Esther's email came through containing this one's speaker's brief. So although I could see my verses were in Matthew at that point, I wasn't able to look the passages up. What I could see were the three responses to Jesus' authority that I was being asked to speak about, with a verse reference next to each. As you know, first was awe, verse 27. Next was rejection, verse 34. And then it was this one, rage, verse 3. Rage. What a fierce word that is. For a while, it was the only word that I could focus on in the whole email. And it brought such a vivid memory to mind of being at the funeral of an elderly neighbour of ours up at a church not far from us, a neighbour who I'd particularly connected with through him and his late wife coming over to our house for my poetry readings. Towards the end of his funeral, his eldest son got up and read out one of my favourite poems by the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. These are the first and last verses of it. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And all that I could think as I looked at that email with the title for today being Jesus and Authority was that with Jesus, there is no dying of the light. Jesus has defeated the darkness once and for all. In John 8, verse 12, Jesus says to the people, I am the light of the world. Whoever believes in me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And John 1, verse 5 reads, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus was crucified, but 3 days later he rose from the dead. He is the light that never dies. This is the card that has stood in my study window for over 21 years now and is one that I want shown at my funeral. It reads, "Death is not extinguishing the light. It is putting out the lamp because the dawn has come." I believe that Jesus has defeated death itself and has authority over it. With Jesus, there will always be a dawn. And I felt I needed to say that at this point. And so to the passage that describes people's responses of rage from Matthew 9 verses 1 to 8 in the NIV. Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over and came to his own town. Some men brought him a paralysed man lying on a mat. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the man, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." At this, some of the teachers of the law said to themselves, "This fellow is blaspheming." Knowing their thoughts, Jesus said, "Why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the paralysed man, "Get up, take your mat and go home." Then the man got up and went home. When the crowd saw this, they were filled with awe, and they praised God who had given such authority to man. Here again, we witness people who are outraged because the life of the suffering person is going to be transformed. But instead, let me draw your attention rather to the paralysed man's friends who carried him to Jesus' feet. He couldn't have got there any other way. I wonder if there are people here today because they had friends who carried them to Jesus right where they needed to be because they wouldn't have got there otherwise. Friends who believed that Jesus could heal and restore those who they loved and who chose to act on it. This makes me notice a number of choices that there are in this passage and reminds me that all of us have a choice as to how we respond to situations and to the authority of Jesus. As I begin to close, let's finish where I started in this series called The Jesus Way, What Happens Next? And let's look at how the paralysed man responded to the 3 commands that Jesus gave to him. Firstly, Jesus said, "Get up." The man had a choice as to what happened next. And so do we. He could have chosen to stay exactly where he was, and so can we. Today is Jesus saying to you, get up. What's your response going to be? Next, Jesus commanded something that I'd never really thought about before. He said, take your mat. What might Jesus have meant with this instruction? I wonder if he meant take your mat and keep it as a reminder of what freedom now looks like. Or if he meant don't ever forget where you've come from or what happened on the journey. For some, taking our mat may be painful. We may have hated lying on it, and in truth, we want to forget all about it. But I think sometimes there are moments when someone in pain is unburdening themselves to us, and it's the time metaphorically to get our mat out and say, I know what it is to lie on that mat. In 2008, when my mum rang from a holiday in Devon to say that she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer, the first person I wanted to speak to about it wasn't a member of my church community at the time, or even someone in my family. I didn't want well-meaning platitudes, or even people's prayers. What I wanted was to talk to someone who knew what it felt like. The very first person I reached out to was my best friend from secondary school, whose mum had died from breast cancer a few years before. The final third command is so different from the one that Derek told us about last week concerning the man who wanted to go back to bury his father. To the now healed, once paralysed man, Jesus didn't say, now you can walk, go off and explore the world. No, what Jesus commanded him to do was to go home. Sometimes the people who Jesus calls us to demonstrate our newfound freedom is to our family. Sometimes he calls us to go home and show that we are different now, that we have thrown off the labels and limitations that others have defined us by and limited us with. In closing, I hope that I have shown that Helen Wong was so right when she said that Jesus has complete and total authority over both the spiritual and physical realms. And I'll finish with an illustration of how I also think that he's the ultimate crux that holds them together. In an example that I think will be of particular interest to the several engineers among the Ebby family. I don't know if anybody remembers the news on Thursday the 10th of April of how a touring helicopter tragically crashed into the Hudson River, New York, instantly killing the pilot, the Escobar parents, their 2 young sons, and their daughter who was due to turn 9 the following day. In the days after, the National Transportation Safety Board began its investigations as to the cause. And I read about it potentially being a problem with something in helicopter engineering called the Jesus nut. This is what it said about that crucial element. If this nut fails mid-flight, the rotor can detach, leading to catastrophic consequences. The term is believed to have originated during the Vietnam War, reflecting the dire situation a crew would face if the nut failed, when their only recourse would be to pray to Jesus. The Jesus nut is meticulously inspected before every flight, and its importance cannot be overstated. It's a single point that holds the entire rotor system in place. In broader engineering contexts, the Jesus nut has come to describe any component whose failure would result in the total collapse of a system. Christ, crucified and risen from the dead, is the nub, is the authority, is the hub that holds all realms together. Our resurrected Jesus, who defeated death and banished darkness, is the inextinguishable light that never dies. And know that with him there will always be another dawn.